Welcome back for another episode about the shipping industry. Today, we are going to focus on the container market with a very special guest joining us from Denmark. Peter Sand has worked for the shipping industry for several decades, but today he is the Chief Analyst of Xeneta. I'll hope you like this episode, and if you do, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. Let's start the show. If we just go all the way back down the memory lane, if you want, how did your childhood look like? Was it shipping from early age, or was it other hobbies and interests taking your time?
I think the closest thing I got to shipping in my childhood was my mother's cousin or something like that, doing some tramp shipment out of Bermuda or something like that at that point in time. I guess it must have been for the Danish liner company Maersk, I guess. So that was the early part of it. Besides that, I was very little, into shipping in my childhood, but taking the ferry from one place to the other at that point in time.
How about business in general? Did you have a keen interest in business at all, or is that also something that comes after education, university, etc.?
No, I think in many ways, for me, working in shipping right now is a sort of having the stars aligned. As a kid, I very much liked geography. I very much liked to know more about the world. Later, when having my training, becoming a master of economics from the university, I mean, having economics in combination with geography, that's shipping, isn't it? So that was supernatural for me to try out the shipping business when an opportunity arose. Almost 20 years ago now. And ever since then, I mean, it's like Hotel California, I guess. Once you checked in, you can never leave.
But if you look at that sort of passion, is it like you want to know the capital in every country? Is it that you want to know how the ocean works? How do you define that passion? Because it can be so much, right? It's a big spectrum.
I think I learned something every day in shipping, because you're absolutely right. Moving from the tallest mountains to the deepest part of the ocean, to the capitals of the countries of the world. Obviously, my main area of interest have been knowing more about trade lanes over the past couple of decades. I mean, in dry bulk and tankers, it was all about natural resources or agricultural products that was supposed to be shipped from one end to the other. And container shipping, where I work now with Xeneta, it's all about, understanding the dynamics of global supply chains, how a product becomes a product, combining many different trade lanes, and in the end, you get a final product which is shipped to the market. And it's just so much endless complexity in those supply chains. So you might say that's so much easier docking, or digging coal out of the ground in one place and shipping it off to a thermal coal power plant at the other end. That's super simple, but in terms of logistics, the complexity is just endless, end to end.
I mean, the supply chain is so massive. I'm gonna go into that in a minute. But just talking about, if you say you started your career in sort of like the dry bulk space and maybe the tankers, right? So do you feel like it's an advantage to have been through as many sectors as possible? Or do you feel like you can be the best dry bulk expert in the world and don't really care about anything about containers? Or do you need that flexibility and understand the different segments? Because they're not the same, right? But you can learn a lot from each of them and combine that knowledge, right?
That's very well put, Christopher. I mean, the ability basically to see the similarities as well as the differences, I think is key to understanding anything that goes on in the shipping market, from demand drivers and dynamics to geopolitical impacts, and they all affect in a different way. But I'm a firm believer in the more you know about something, the better you will be also to basically think about it and consider where is this going. And I think that's the key ability for anyone that covers a lot of different sectors or one sector only, having an idea of what comes next. What should those that follow you get out of, hearing your line of thoughts on what comes next, be it currently right now, when we are talking in end March, the Ukraine-Russia crisis is, of course, one of the things that catch everyone's attention, and being able to also share some thoughts on what would the world look like in terms of, say, disruptions to global logistics if the US were to put sanctions on China for not following the path and the road of Western nations. I mean, it requires big thoughts, and there are no straight answers to that. But I think the ability to believe and imagine, I guess that, what was that? Albert Einstein saying at some point in time that imagination is more important than knowledge. I believe in a firm combination of those, and I trust basically that if you start perhaps a bit more simple in dry bulk, and then work your way through various sectors, you can only take something away from that and benefit going forward, because you also need, say, that information and that knowledge and that insights when you meet a lot of great people in the industry from time to time in various positions, and they may actually also have moved from one sector to the other. So there's always good stuff to take away from being, say, more of a generalist, or say more of a specialist.
Another late day at the office, busy with dial-up earnings calls, buried in annual reports, transcripts, and... Wait, what? There's an app for that?
Good morning, everyone. We are glad you can join us for earnings
Quarter is the
calls.
world's fastest growing investor relations app. With Quarter in your hand, you get frictionless access to earnings reports, slide decks, earnings calls, and transcripts literally anywhere in the world. Visit your app store of choice and download Quarter today. And the best part, it's 100% free.
But if we start broad in the container market, how do you summarize it? Because since there's so many factors at play, it's almost like hard to know where to start. But it's the simplest way to start is just to say that you have an importer, you have an exporter, and something in between needs to happen. But that something in between is massive, and it's so many factors at play at the same time.
I think it's important just to mention a few of the main actors in the market up front. I mean, in container shipping, a lot of focus is, of course, on the liner business and the carriers themselves, those that owns the asset that transport the goods. But naturally, at Xeneta, our key customers are the shippers, those that basically transport the goods and have that, say, service requirement to the carriers, and rightly require very sophisticated logistics, basically, to carry out their business, because the service provider from a shipping perspective here is the carriers trying to set up an also quite complex network that combine all of the, as we discussed before, all the various products that goes into one finalized product, because a lot of the things that are moved in containers right now by many shippers on a global scale are intermediaries, that they are semi-finished goods. So you need basically a lot of insights into your own business before you can procure freight like a pro, and basically have that, say, inside of your own business at the benefit also of the carrier, of the liner company that can then optimize their logistics there. But I think also a freight forwarder is doing an excellent job in the market right now. And I think basically what comes out of 2 extraordinary years for container shipping right now, I mean, we had 10 years of, say, gearing down towards a different level of globalization. Well, imagine that we just had 2 years of windfall profits to the carriers. And they are, of course, seeking to put all of those money into to great investments. We saw already towards the end of last year some of that $50 billion being spent on new ships, but having profits exceeding $100 billion in combination. We certainly see also a need for those carriers to seize the opportunity that they are eyeing in the market right now. So buying up other logistics providers, adding air cargo also to their offering, becoming more of a one-stop shop for global logistics, and for sure, some freight forwarders will feel the squeeze on this. Some small shippers will feel the force of being, say, offered one product only. That's the spot market. Whereas some shippers may be able to actually make good use of this opportunity, because the way I see it is that there's also an opportunity to take away from the shippers here. If they find out that they are unique or special or particularly strong on a few trades, they should of course make sure that they become the ship of choice also for the carriers, and by that still form solid partnerships for their business going forward, in addition of course to other trades where they may find themselves at the mercy of the spot market.
Can we also just add on in that analysis how you would separate sort of like the big market trends? And you have this, like, we had this growing in the feeder market, right? So is it also possible to just explain for people who are not that interested in shipping how this dynamic works? Because it seems like many people, or some people, saw so big opportunities that they actually also set up new routes and also use that as an advantage, right?
I think the carriers of the world constantly optimize their global networks, and so do freight forwarders. Everyone else in logistics are trying constantly, of course, to solve the problems of their customers. So during the pandemic and during the most recent disruptions from the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and of course also the most recent slew of lockdowns in China, everyone is trying to solve the problems. I mean, from one perspective, we have never seen such an appallingly low service level by global carriers. But in all fairness, they have also struggled to keep up with, struggling hinterland connectivity in main ports, and for truck drivers' licenses. I mean, COVID licenses. Can they crisscross a country like they used to, or are they basically prohibited from carrying out the business that they once did? So in many ways, I mean, the first mile of any, product from end to end is equally important to the last mile. Often in businesses you talk about the last mile because that's basically happening in Northern America and Western Europe. But the first mile in China, in Far Eastern Asian manufacturing hubs, Korea, Japan, of course, is at least as important to make sure that the goods are moved in and out, semi-finished one way, finished the other way, and then of course to the super efficient ports before they travel around the globe. So I think it's also fair to access that the world have never seen, so many boxes being transported on a global scale, and that's of course why obstacles and problems also occurred, especially during times of crisis like we have seen recently.
What do you think is the right summary of the situation today? Because obviously now we have a war that is taking a lot of attention, of course, and it seems like China is going to keep having this like zero policy for COVID. So that doesn't seem very bullish for, how the ports will operate, because it seems very difficult to have ports operating at that scale. If one COVID can mean that you have to shut down, right? What do you think will be the situation going forward?
Yeah, you live, you learn, and you do so also in the Communist Party of China. When comparing the lockdowns we saw in early 2020 in China, the outbreak in Wuhan, last year we also saw lockdowns around the port of Yantian, and also moving all the way up to Tianjin just before the Chinese Lunar New Year. I mean, they have become better at handling this zero COVID policy and basically the implications of that to the global supply chains. What we saw recently around Shenzhen was disruptive, but not to the extent that we saw it in the second half of 2021. Our expectations at Xeneta is for sure that we will continue to see implications from the zero COVID policy in China for the rest of the year, perhaps even more than that, as new COVID strains most likely also will appear, bringing around more troubles, especially if you have, a low working vaccine, which is the case in China, I guess I can say, and it basically gives them reason also to stick to the guns they know, and that's zero COVID policy. Obviously, they want to make it as smooth as possible. They want to be sure that the world is served with all the goods that they can deliver from China. But I think going forward, we should expect still stop and go from China. We should expect carriers and shippers, freight forwarders, anyone in logistics to be able to draw up new contingency plans at short notice in order to handle these various say lockdowns and disruptions, because there will come new ones. I cannot foresee whether that'll be next week or next month or next quarter, but for sure this COVID pandemic is far from over in a global logistics perspective.
If we look at, like, if you take the lenses of like a ship owner, and if you have this like supply chain shock that so many people read about, like, what's the incentive for ship owners to try to solve that, right? Because if they have been in a market where, you know, the rates have been pretty low, finally they're cashing in so much money and their ships needs payments, right? So maybe it's not so easy for people outside of shipping to understand, but to really understand the incentives at the different actors is really key to understand what's going to happen in the shipping market, right? Because there's a lot of interest at play at the same time, but it doesn't mean that everyone has the same interest of mind. No,
I think that's you can say the flip side of the coin for the liner industry right now. That all of a sudden this is mainstream media news. It used to be industry news 3 years ago when the carriers were delivering high schedule reliability at super low cost. But around came the Ever Given blockage of Suez Canal approximately a year ago. We saw also from the US only in January 7.9% of inflation, the highest in 4 decades. And shipping having record high freight rates are of course to blame for this. At least the ignorance would say. Sorry for putting it out there, because obviously higher transportation costs is not the core reason behind higher inflation anywhere. But realizing that the spot markets today are 10 times higher than they once was, of course there is a spillover effect. But it's second for sure, if not third or fourth, to that of the economic stimulus provided left, right, and center to bring, say, global economies fast away from the immediate impacts of COVID. So liner incentives are still for sure to make sure that their ships are full when they sail. They spent 10 years cutting the unit cost of transporting cargo from A to B, and that's why you also see that once the say freight rates went up in the mid of 2020, that was instantly finding its way to the very say bottom line of any one of these liners. Naturally, 2 years into the pandemic plus, you might say, the price also of say higher say chartering in new ships have of course gone up. We see super high charter rates are also being paid by global carriers. So it dents of course a bit of the profits, also distributing some to those that are pure tonnage providers in the world, those that were on the brink of bankruptcy only 2 years ago when they saw their market completely evaporate in front of them. But let's say fast forward to what are on the minds of the carriers right now. I mean, the customers are on the minds of their carriers, and they of course need also to make quite a significant business decision. Should we focus only on the ocean part of shipping? Should we also offer our clients a more integrated logistics, like becoming a full service provider? It's a split decision in the industry. How would you like to spend your money? And it, of course, also originates from the fact that this is a very competitive market, but it's also a competitive market where state-owned entities are fighting privately held entities. So there are no straightforward solutions on what to do with any, say, liner company out there. But I think it's fair to say that they would all like to bring on board the must-have clients. So the biggest shippers of the world right now must feel in a special place, even though it is a seller's market in terms of the freight rates. They are also capable of, bringing demands to the negotiation table when the carriers flock around their many boxes that they would like to add onto their services, so they can still benefit from selling that extra space to the smaller customers in the spot market. So it's complex and yet so simple.
Super interesting. I just also wanted to ask you about the if we take the consolidation piece, right? It seems like in containers, let's keep it simple, that it seems like the market is going in a direction where it seems like you only need 4 companies in the world in containers, in the big containers, right? So can you just explain the dynamics of why we have 3-4 companies that are bigger than everyone else? Because in some industries, you don't get that, while in other industries, you get that consolidation for many different reasons, right? So, but is this going to play out that you only need Maersk and 2 other companies and that's enough? Or should it be more spread evenly?
I think container shipping is for sure the most consolidated of any shipping sector. But having said that, they are still in fierce competition. I know that there is an argument, of course, whether that is not the case, since they are, block exempted in Europe from the normal competition authority and rules. So they can basically act. You cannot say they can act as one. They still act individually, but they operate under various alliances. You may know the 3 main alliances of the world that basically covers more than 80% of the goods being transported, but they are made up by more than 10 different companies pooling their offered services, but making use of their various ships on those services. It's very much like you and I buying a ticket around the world, for instance, on an airplane. It's easy for you as a customer to get around because the company that you initially get in touch with do have partners that they work with to bring you around the globe, and it's exactly the same thing. So if we were to see a world without the alliances, and I think the risk is always there. Especially the American politicians are heavily impacted now by some shippers lobby organizations that have cried foul over, especially the lack of export abilities from America. So there is a probe into the abuse of market power by the alliances serving US right now, and I think that's the most critical regulatory risk for the carriers. But from a shipper perspective, I don't think they exactly feel the same as the regulators in this case. They just want the best possible service at the right price, and be it a very consolidated industry, be it one that is. You cannot say. I think control is like a legal term for competition authorities, but they operate within 3 alliances, and then we have a lot of special extra independent companies that also operate. And I think it's actually, if I may bring around the example of the Trans-Pacific trade lane right now, where the lion's share of American imports basically come from, there's an equal share of independent providers of liner services on the Trans-Pacific as there is to the alliances on that trade, and that has of course been it has come around due to the spectacular demand to US. One that the big alliances basically could not satisfy. So there's plenty of room for those independent operators also. So I think you must be also wise enough to understand what is it that the alliances bring around, what is it that consolidated companies bring around. But getting back to it, I guess where you started, Christopher, can we see only 3 mega companies service the world? No, we cannot. They all hold their special part of the world as their area of expertise, and they need global partners to deliver a service offering to global shippers also, and there are no other good alternatives in my view to the alliances that you see right now. If you are to expect a top-notch service system, great, hopefully also soon for the shippers, lower freight rates, of course, but go to places that are easy to use, because in all fairness, global logistics are set up to connect a seller in one end of the world and a buyer in another end of the world in as seamlessly fashion as possible. So be careful what you do in the regulators part of the field here. Make sure that those businesses that require the ability to trade on a global scale can do so as easy as possible.
Very, very good answer. I'm just thinking, since you talk so much to clients and key stakeholders, what are the questions you find hardest to answer right now? Is it all about the war, or is it something else that is very, very hard to answer when people ask you about them?
Let me give you an example from my previous career, also working with tankers, and I think it's great, and it's also proof to me that the world of shipping may be the world's biggest yet invisible industry. So people basically come to me and to us with questions that I thought they knew the answer to themselves, but due to, of course, the fact that if you operate, say, a small chemical tanker in one part of the world, you do not talk to your competitors. You keep your cards close to yourself, and you try to grab whatever demand is around. In container shipping, it's same, but different. But of course, if you're shipping, say, refrigerated cargoes out of Europe, well, you need to know also about the dynamics in the greater chains of logistics, because there may be a shortage of say, temperature controlled boxes out of Europe due to a delayed season of say, perishable goods. Or other goods transported also in temperature-controlled reefers from South America, for instance, into Europe. So it's all connected, and I think that's where we at Xeneta Market Analysis can benefit also the clients, that we see things from a helicopter, from a satellite view, more than the operational perspective on the ground. So the combination of working closely with our customers and stakeholders in the industry, we try to combine the dots and see those various aspects in combination and in the wider picture. So of course that is one of the big questions, and one of the other questions, of course, relates to: is it possible to get cargo in and out of Russia? I mean, it's been tricky to follow just the pace of sanctions. What could I, as a shipper, do? In which way do the liner companies react? And if I were to ship any goods into Russia, how would I get around that? Would that be illegal per se, or would it not? So I think working in a global business with a lot of politics also impacting from time to time, and if you are in breach of, say, US secondary sanctions, that could be super harmful to you as a company working on a global scale, because that may say bring you out of business with American customers, and of course you cannot do that in a world of global liner shipping.
If we look at the new tech innovations and software, I mean, you have a company like Flexport, which obviously get a lot of media attention, and you have Xeneta, which you are representing. How would you describe this new industry about analyzing, maybe bringing more transparency, more data into the industry? Because to your point, just recently, maybe some people who own a ship like to hide their cards. Maybe they feel like they're playing poker back and forth in terms of the price, etc. Is this like a massive shift over the 10 years that you get companies who try to bring transparency to the space? And how would you just summarize this maybe new industry that is built on top, on like the hard assets, right? Because there's a lot of software projects going on.
Why we do things, well, we do operate in quite different parts of that world. I mean, Flexport being a digital freight forwarder, and Xeneta being all about container shipping, freight rates, and air cargo insights. I mean, what we strive to do, I guess, both of us, is to bring transparency into a notoriously intransparent industry. So obviously, in the early days of Xeneta, I mean, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, so it's been quite a ride over the past decade. But obviously, from the start of it, people were instantly skeptical, saying, "How can you do this? Nobody will give you any data. Nobody will like what you do because you disrupt status quo in the market." I guess that was really jet fuel on the fire of our founders, that they wanted to prove them wrong. And instantly that was a success. Of course, building the company that we have today it's a quite different stage where we are right now than where we were when we started. But we're basically all about crowdsourcing that information from all of our customers, and so they see the benefit of contributing to our aim of making it more transparent. Because if you were to say, I mean, you literally, you cannot do it yourself. You can get bits and pieces from various other places. I guess many know the Shanghai Shipping Exchange, but that's all about, say, exports out of China. I mean, it may be the lion's share of the business, but there are so many other port pairs. Xeneta have 160,000 port pairs on a global scale. So there's business to be handled in many other places. And I guess adding to this transparency can only benefit not only the customers that buy the transportation services, but in the end also consumers like you and I, if they're capable of procuring their freight to a much better level. I mean, that will of course contribute also to more globalization, to lower cost for the end products, etc. Even though we discussed inflation just before. I mean, it's what you get from globalization is a better product. It's a wider selection, and it's more choices in terms of where you can make your product. So I think the quality of what we have here today is second to none.
What's the hardest data to collect? Is there some data sets that are very, very hard to capture, or is it just like a snowball effect? So once you have enough, it's easier to get the next one.
It's a very good question, to be honest, also, because of course what we have is not information from the carriers. So we do not push whatever rate sheets they may have on their spot platforms. What we bring is deals done. So our data is as strong as what we get from customers. So if we are seeking, for instance, going into a very new market, obviously we are a little bit in a chicken and egg situation. We need someone delivering also insights and data on say freight trade lanes in and out of that place, but also in order to get the customers in that place, we need something special to offer them up front. But that's what we do. I mean, we started also with a keen focus around a few shippers in and out of Oslo, and now we are all over the world. Right now, with a keen focus also on getting some access into the big Asian market, because also there are tons of shippers out there. And I guess, I mean, we grow with our customers. So the more people can contribute, the better the overall product and offering also gets. So I can only encourage, those that perhaps do business in parts of the world that we do not necessarily cover to the extent that we cover in other parts of the world. A little bit of patience, and then I guess it all proves nicely in the end when we get together and bring that transparency around benefiting everyone in the industry.
Sounds perfect. Have you seen anything you love in sort of the decarbonization concept or project that's going on? Because whoever you talk to seems like they are a bit uncertain, and some people are very bullish on some technology. But to be honest, like it seems like a very hard puzzle to crack which technology should be used, right? Do you see anything you feel very strongly about, or do you also feel like it's about experimentation and maybe also just heavy regulation and like force people to make decisions?
I think there are two aspects of this. Of course, who should focus mostly on cutting carbon emission, that must of course be the owners and operators, full stop. And they can do so in various ways. I think it's fair to assess that either you make use of fossil fuels or you do not. But economies of scale, of course, works super well in container shipping. The individual carbon footprint on each box is just so much better on a big ship. Because of course you burn more fuel on a big ship, but if you can say add 4 times as many boxes, say that's the ratio that you should be looking out for. At Xeneta, what we try to do is of course also to bring around, say, actionable insights for our customers with a transparency product into that of carbon emissions from the carriers, and naturally our focus is not on the performance of the individual ship, like for instance the ship owner would be, or would have, but of course finding out who delivers the best numbers on any given trade lane. So if you are a shipper focusing on, for instance, goods from Asia to South America, you should be able to compare across the board of course, with a clear methodology that carrier A is better on the carbon emissions as compared to carrier B or C, for instance. So that product we're about to launch later in the year, and I think that will definitely push something special into an industry that's very, say, focused on the assets. I mean, if we are to bring a product to the market where global shippers, and I guess that drive comes from customers, and it comes from the global shippers serving those customers. So obviously at some point in time we need, and I think that point in time comes faster than anyone can expect now, we need to be able to compare apples with apples here. We need to see what kind of carbon footprint you get from the individual services. And trust me, it's super complex to do, but we're doing all we can right now, and I'm looking very much forward to the product launch of that later in the year, because I think it will look quite different from what you see in the market from other offerings, and it will still also bring the incentive to where it should be, and basically looping me back to where we started on who should drive emissions down. Owners and operators make the investments needed to bring around not only ammonia fuel ships or methanol fuel ships, but finding out ways to constantly, decarbonize the industry. It may be tricky to completely bring it down to an absolute zero, but if we can continue down the trail of lower emissions per unit every time, I think we're doing a super good job in global logistics.
Makes sense. If you just take another aspect of innovation, there's been so much hype regarding, self-driving cars, and of course that's super dangerous because you have to make a software decision. Should you hit this cat or should you hit this child, right? So many complex issues you have to take on, and the same in airlines, right? I don't think people would love to have an AI bot fly them over the world, right? But in shipping, it seems like maybe that's the most easiest scenario to imagine, that you don't really need people on board vessels because maybe containers don't have feelings, right? Maybe they don't bother if who's taking them over the ocean. So do you feel like shipping is the one industry that you can see almost like just a software service taking them back and forth?
Well, the containers themselves may not have feelings, but I guess the shippers with cargo on board surely feel the need for having the best possible transportation done when the value of the ship and the cargo exceeds $4 or $5 billion US for just one of the big ships, and whether the best solution is to have a fully autonomous ship transporting your goods from A to B, or that a well-trained captain and his crew is the best one. I think we will see, say, more digital assistance to the global logistics going forward. I still think we're some way from having, say, fully autonomous ships on main trades. Having said that, we have one in. Well, I'm not in Norway right now. You're from Norway, but I guess we have Hydro setting up that Yara Birkeland vessel, which is a fully autonomous one to the extent of my knowledge. So it is capable. The American Army, the American Navy have been doing that for ages, and I guess we know all about drones. So the technology is there, but right now, from a regulatory perspective, the IMO is looking into what needs to change in order to progress this going forward, because there is something to take away from this. Not necessarily in terms of bringing down cost, which is often the driver behind implementing new technology, because the crew on board the ships are not the most expensive part of the voyage. That's still the bunker fuels and the price of oil. So I guess most of the technology-driven initiatives should focus on bringing down the bunker fuel consumption and, of course, also the emissions, and then later perhaps find out where should we set up, say, smart logistics, where we integrate fully autonomous ships that basically just dock themselves, and super smart containers that also find their own way from where they are produced and filled to where they see their end destination at a warehouse in Spain, for instance. So a lot of interesting initiatives. I tend to follow those as much as I can, because I think it's super interesting. But it's also, I mean, we're still many years away from having a fully autonomous fleet serving global needs in the liner shipping industry.
Perfect summary. So I just have one topic left, and that's more towards, making a career in shipping, because many people who are tuning into this show are sort of at the start of their careers. And I also know that you give a lot of lectures in Denmark talking about your knowledge or expertise. So what do you feel like people should focus on at their early days in shipping, or even if they have just started their education, right? Do you give any general advice, or do you always say, like, you have to find your own journey? You shouldn't copy me or anyone else in the industry?
I think you should stay curious. I think that's the most relevant comment to make here, and then follow your interest. And if you're trying to follow in anyone's footprints, you might just end up stumbling. But having said that, of course, you should get inspiration, get knowledge, get insights from those that are around, and you're absolutely right. In an extent to giving lectures in real life. Of course, at the Xeneta newsroom every Thursday, we also put ourselves on the line in terms of what do we see in the market, and in which way is that likely to affect your business. So we try to be out there in podcasts like yours also. Thanks for having me today, and of course also in various other conferences around the world. So I think having due respect for those people that can bring you insights, and don't be afraid to ask. I think I'm super happy every time around that I get someone asking me a question on anything, and you should not be afraid to ask, because I mean, you learn something new every day. But you must, of course, establish your own knowledge with a decent insight into the fundamentals. So I guess that would be my word of advice for a starter. Please do learn about the fundamentals of the market. Know how those dynamics work. Do not expect to understand all the dynamics of the market you see right now from week 2 of your working life in shipping, because what we often discuss also in a podcast like this one, and in many different events, webinars, podcast aspects of life, is the advanced level. That's basically where we built on top of a lot of knowledge in order to hopefully see through the mist and the darkness, and give an idea of where we may be heading next. So I think stay curious, stay humble, but don't be afraid to have your own opinion. But be sure that you have underpinned that opinion with say, a solid insight into the fundamental dynamics, because at the end of the day, those rule the world too.
That's a great summary. And also just to add on that argument, I think it's so important when you emphasize interest, right? Because shipping is like a 24/7 industry and it's so dynamic. So if you don't have an interest for it, you will likely don't manage, be in the industry for 20 years, because there's always something new happening. And you need to add that on as well, right? So I don't think it's just about learning a playbook and accept that playbook to stay the same forever, right? It changes so much.
Yeah, it's not like I say switch off the conveyor belt when I leave for my home, say at 4:00 in the afternoon. No, there's always something going on that affects global logistics 24/7, 365. So the trick, of course, also further down the line of your career is to know which factors affect the market the most, and which, say, dynamics or factors that may catch a lot of attention have little or no meaning or impact at all to that of shipping, for instance, because that can also be the case. And only when you have that, insight into what matters and what doesn't matter, you're also capable of getting a good night out and a good night's sleep. Knowing that you can catch up tomorrow. You should not have fear of missing out, but you should just stay curious, stay interested, and then welcome to the shipping industry if you want to join it, because I think it's super fun.
It's a perfect ending, Peter. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, Christopher, and thank you all for listening in and for viewing this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.